The 2018 film Hereditary, from director Ari Aster, made waves as one of the best horror movies and psychological thrillers of the year. Hereditary follows Annie Graham, an artist and mother who struggles to maintain her relationships with her husband, Steve, and two children, Peter and Charlie, after the passing of the secretive matriarch of the family, Ellen Ley. Hereditary opens with Ellen Ley's funeral, as Annie sets up the narrative with a eulogy depicting her tense and distraught relationship with her mother. Peter and Charlie get into a car accident in which Charlie dies tragically. Charlie's death tears the family apart, straining the relationship of Annie and Peter especially. The members of the Graham family all struggle to cope with their grief, Annie dealing with the loss of yet another family member, and Peter his guilt for essentially causing the death of his younger sister. As the film progresses, the Graham family is plagued by malevolent supernatural forces. Annie and Peter are haunted by Charlie's presence, driving them both to near insanity. Annie reluctantly drags herself to a support group to help manage her grief, where she meets Joan, a kind stranger who teaches Annie how to perform a seance so as to communicate with Charlie and find closure. In the end, it is revealed that the secrecy Ellen Ley maintained throughout her lifetime was a cover for a cult she belonged to which she had offered the bodies of her grandchildren to a possessive demonic entity known to the cult as Payman, who desires the body of a male host to inhabit. Annie discovers that Joan is a member of Ellen Ley's cult, and that after her death, the cult took it upon themselves to complete the transfer of Payman's spirit from Charlie's body, the former host, into Peter. The film ends with a successful possession of Peter, as the cult worships him, now Payman, swearing their eternal allegiance to him. Film theorist Laura Mulvey, best known for her essay on visual pleasure and narrative cinema and the concept of the male gaze, also explores death in narrative cinema in her essay Death 24 Frames Per Second, in what she calls stillness and the moving image. Mulvey's traditional definition of the male gaze in cinema refers to the masculine, heterosexual perspective that presents women as sexual objects, all for the pleasure of the male spectator. While Hereditary, a horror/thriller, doesn't present any of its female characters in this light, it does paint one in particular, Annie Graham, in another separate yet inherently male gaze, the stereotypical hysterical woman. In Annie's case, the female character is not Mulvey's defined, sexualized spectacle. Instead, she is made to be a spectacle because her actions are deemed hysterical by other male characters, particularly her husband Steve and her son Peter. On the technical side, when considering elements like camera movement and shot duration, Mulvey talks about the stillness surrounding death in the moving image. Hereditary utilizes long takes and little to no action in the physical subject in the frame to help the spectator visualize this stillness that accompanies death. Slow pans and zooms force the spectator to watch until he or she is uncomfortable. This technical strategy of immersing the audience in stillness creates feelings of anxiety in the spectator as an individual, which is part of what makes Hereditary such a successful psychological thriller.
C'est l'heure, Peter.
It goes without saying that death is a central theme, even a motif, throughout the entirety of Hereditary. As we saw before, the film begins with a funeral. even printing Ellen Leigh's obituary for the audience to read like a title card before the start of the visual narrative. A long history of character deaths extends throughout the film, moving from Ellen Leigh's funeral to the recounting of Annie's family history in the group therapy session scene, where we learn that Annie's father and older brother died by suicide, blaming Ellen Leigh for putting someone inside of them. There also is the brief but unsettling scene where Charlie cuts the head of a bird off with scissors. The film then moves into Charlie's graphic beheading and Joan's fabricated story of the deaths of her son and young grandson Louis, before the film nosedives into the deaths of our protagonists, Steve, Annie, and ultimately Peter. Laura Mulvey also discusses themes of the preservation of the body and overcoming death, and mentions the works of French film theorist Andre Bazin in his essay The Ontology of the Photographic Image. In Hereditary, we see Bazin's theory of preservation at work, first and foremost, in Annie's miniature replicas. The primary goal of Annie's artistry is specifically to capture a moment in a physical medium so as to suspend that particular moment in time. We see this explicitly in Annie's replica of Ellen Leigh attempting to breastfeed an infant Charlie, and Annie's recreation of Charlie's death, which she calls a neutral view of the accident. There's also a strong emphasis on overcoming death that actively counteracts the traditional idea of death as an end. Ellen Leigh's grave is dug up and bodies stolen, only to be rediscovered in the attic of the Graham family's home. There's also this element of the reanimation of the body after death, which we see predominantly at the end of the film, where Annie's headless body floats into the treehouse. In the final ritual, we also see Charlie's head crowned and being worshipped by the cult like an idol, and both Annie and Ellen Leigh's bodies move as they bow to Peter, now Payman. The final image the film leaves us with is a miniature replica of the ritual in the treehouse, poised almost like a nativity scene. Again, we see that physical representation of a single moment in time so as to preserve it. And this has been the theories of Laura Mulvey and Andre Bazin in Ari Aster's Hereditary, created for film theory classes at the University of Iowa.
Flows and flows of angel hair and ice cream castles.